interesting enough, when I graduated in the early 90s, it was I graduated right in the midst of a recession. So very familiar with what that feels like, and I hope we could have a mile and a relatively short one coming up. And then I work for 6 years in the mobile wireless communication space. First for Cellular One, and then for Nextel, and which is how I came to this area. And of course, as Brian mentioned, I was able to get my MBA from MIT Sloan, which effectively helped me change my career from a purely a technical management track to more of a business track. And I just want to make one minor correction. It's actually was 20 years, not 30. So I'm not that old. But just almost exactly 20 years ago is when I started my first company. So we can go into a little bit more details about the background of that.
Sure.
But I'm really glad to be here tonight and share my experiences with you. And I know we're going to have a lot of Q&A coming up, so get your questions ready. But I guess first, let me pass the mic back to Brian.
Sure. Thank you. Virtually grabbing it. Thank you. So the way we always do this, the agenda, usually it's, we go through your, it's like the story arc, right? Like where you born, where you raised, you went through that. I think sometimes talking about your parents, right, and what they did and what it taught you over the years. And then finally, maybe what was your first entrepreneur experience? So let's do that. We'll start right. I mean, you kind of covered it, but is there anything else that you wanted to cover about your parents? And
yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I want to say, nobody really in my family had any entrepreneur experience or journey. My dad was an engineer, my mom was a teacher. So nobody in my family that I know of have ever, started a business or a company. So I tend to feel like, entrepreneurs are more made than born. So any one of you out there, don't listen to others telling you that the entrepreneurs are born, because I think we can all learn how to be a good entrepreneur. So that, obviously Asian American type families, education was almost important. And, obviously have very, very supportive parents that paved the path for my education. So I'm highly appreciative of that. Mm-hmm. But I think the key point here is I did not, growing up, I did not have any idea about anything about entrepreneurship. In fact, I think some of it came from my own personal curiosity. I think I can remember my first job working for Cellular One, and one of the things I started thinking about was, back then we'll have this nice brochure, comes out once a year, that's called the annual report. I don't think anybody reads that anymore nowadays. But back then, once a year, you get this nicely published annual report, and the back cover almost always is a picture of the board of directors, and then the front cover generally is a nice picture of the senior management team. Mm-hmm. And of course, back then, this was almost 30 years ago. You don't really see a lot of Asian Americans on either side of those covers. But I started to think about is how do these people get to where they are? How did the company get started? How do you actually get on to be to serve on the board of a company? So I think a lot of curiosity probably had a seed back then. But I wasn't quite. So my journey was like this. I work in a publicly traded company. I really was lucky in the sense that I entered the workforce in a high growth industry. This was wireless mobile phones, And when I started, we didn't actually have the mobile phones as you would know today. You can have a car phone that's installed in the trunk of your car, or you can have what's called a bag phone, which you carry with you. And that was really the birth of the mobile cellular industry. So I was lucky. I started working in the industry or a market, I would say, has a lot of tailwind behind it. It was, freshly born.
So this was after you obviously graduated. Then you were an RO.
Right. I was just engineer. Right. I was just a technical engineer.
Okay.
I assume some of you some of you out here tonight is also just you're just a computer scientist, or you're a developer. You're a technical. You have a technical field that you're in. Mm. So really, when I didn't really know, I was going to be an entrepreneur. And it wasn't really until I started my education at MIT. And of course, it just happens to be one of the most entrepreneur schools in the US, or at least on the East Coast. And that really opened my mind to the world of startups.
Terry, I wanted to kind of dig in a little bit there, because the reason why I want to kind of dig more is because there's a lot of folks here in this meeting who are exactly in your position, who are engineers, right? And they're just they'll have management that are like, hey, just do it, get it done, and then let me be the manager, and so what was it like just when you were thinking like, hey, I need to bust out of this, like maybe this engineering bubble, and I wanted to now, and then you applied to obviously the MBA Sloan School, right? So Did you have that, to maybe tell us, like, did you have that sort of back of your mind, like, man, I think I want to break out of this engineer role and maybe go, management? Like, what was that thinking?
Yeah, I think a lot of it happened by accident. But I think that, first of all, I should say is, if you're an engineer, if you're a developer, first almost is be a good developer, right? Be a good engineer. Learn everything you can. Gather that work experience. That's going to be really critical later on. But I think a couple of things, I would say observations, right? Mm-hmm. One was I started seeing that in a purely technical career path, maybe you become a manager and you become a director and become a VP, but that career path was very narrow. Very rarely do you see a developer or engineer become a manager in the other business fields. Nobody went from a developer to a marketing manager or a finance manager or a business development manager, right? And that was just relatively narrow career path. And then the second thing, this was maybe more of an accident, was, because I was at a company that paid for education. So I started taking graduate level classes. And I first, of course, when I was an engineer, I started taking master classes in engineering. And I would say probably a year into it, I was just bored out of my mind going to these night classes, mm-hmm. and what felt like doing pure math. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't, I probably knew at that point, I wasn't that interested in a purely technical field. And again, I got lucky in the sense that I became a team lead or a manager about 3 years into my career, and I started taking, and then that qualified me to take MBA classes or business school classes. So I switched over, and I started taking, management classes, accounting classes, finance, and such. And I realized that there's a lot more than just being a developer or being an engineer.
So Terry, hold on. So I wanted to ask more about that question here. So there's folks here who are like, hey, I'm going to go undergrad, because that's what's been kind of throwing at us, right? They're like, hey, STEM, learn to code, right. Be technical. And there's going to be a point in everyone's life where it's like, okay, I've done this long enough. I've kind of gotten on the ladder, right?
Hmm.
The engineer ladder. I've gotten to the point where, okay, I may be a little bit bored at this. Now, do I go in management? So that's scenario one. Second scenario is, can I just go business all the way and not have the technical part of that? Now looking, back, now that you're where you are now.
Yeah. I from what I gone through, obviously I was, more on the technical track. And I think the first thing that was important, at least for me, was if you go into the field, be very good at it, right? If you're in whatever field you're in, learn as much as you can. And, number one, you're proving yourself. Number two is you start to develop um, connections or at least a reputation
Hmm.
in your field.
Okay.
And the more you do, the more people you're going to meet. If you're going to present, a white paper, or you're going to, work on whatever, the number one is you know that you're good at it. So that gives you the self-confidence. The second thing is other people start to know that, okay, you're at least, you know what you're talking about, you're trustworthy, and they can depend on you, right? So all those things are going to come back as foundations when you start a company.
Okay. Okay. So I want to kind of like move a little bit forward here, where
Yes.
you were obviously after Sloan, you were in the strategic business operations at Nextel. Learn a few things there, and help raise capital. And that went IPO around February 2000, right? This is where Mark Warner is like the co-founder there too, right? But I understand you actually never worked with them there, right?
Yeah.
You
So let me kind of fast track it, right? So let me kind of get to, I was working at a company, and it got to a point where I felt like um, I had enough training, both at the company and out and from my education, and also I was lucky. Again, this is one of the accidents I was talking about. Normally, and I was about 30 at the time, so normally the venture capitalists or the VCs, at least back then, normally they would never invest in people in their 20s or 30s, right? Back then, the VCs are almost purely an old white man's club.
Mhm.
I don't think I don't even think I ever pitched to a woman VC back then, and definitely very few minorities. But the point was, it was an accident that just as the internet changed all that. And because older people at the time didn't know anything about internet, the VC started funding the younger generation, so that they can go capture these opportunities that are created by this internet movement.
Mhm.
So first of all, you got to be ready, but the opportunity came. The opportunity came that was when people 30 or younger could actually start companies and get funded.
Mhm.
And I will also say that 20 years ago, it was very difficult to really bootstrap any technology-based company, right? There are really two kinds of entrepreneurs or opportunities that you could do. One is kind of just, more of a lifestyle type business where, you may be opening a restaurant, or you may be, doing some consulting or doing some government contractor work. That's all entrepreneurship, but I would call it more of a lifestyle side.
Mhm.
Or you go after the sort of the big home run, tech-based, and back then it was almost 100% venture backed, because the uh, the because the barrier to even come up with these servers and everything else was not like what it is
Right.
today, where you could just get a couple $100, you could get started and get everything you need. Back then that was very difficult to do.
Right.
So what I would say is, I had an opportunity, and I had an idea, and internet was hot at the time, so I even more try to fit my idea to that internet space. And that's kind of how I got my initial angel funding. It was less than $1 million when we got started 20 years ago.
Now, is this the info match?
That was info match. Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about that, like the info match, because this here is where I mean, I remember a while back reading about this, right? Info match, and it was really, if you can kind of tell us the concept.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do that first. Yeah.
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah. So very quickly, I wrote a business plan and competed at the MIT at the time, 50K business plan competition. Now it's 100K. So the winner gets 100K today. It's once a year in the springtime. So I wrote a business plan, competed in the competition, and that was sort of a location-based SMS advertising business. Of course, that never really panned out. I didn't win, and by the way, and neither did a group of my classmates. Neither did they win, but they started Akamai, so a multi-billion-dollar company a couple of years out of school. Those are my classmates. In any case, so I had an idea. And then when the internet came, I tried to repurpose a very similar idea and fit the internet model. So the original idea was I would create a widget, even before the word widget was really born. I would create a widget, and any website that would use my widget will be able to send any time-sensitive alerts to people's mobile devices. So that was my first idea that I actually got angel funding. But then of course, the .com crashed. So very quickly, in a matter of a couple months, once we got the angel funding, we were faced with the possibility that our customers are all going out of business.
Yeah.
And we had to, of course, we have to try to pivot. And we first pivoted to the enterprise. Then we also realized without quality of service, mobile messaging or SMS wasn't really going to have a market in the enterprise. And then so between the time we raised the angel funding, created the initial team, got a lease on the office, and it started working. After we assembled some furniture, probably within 4 or 5 months, we came to the conclusion that it was actually a business that was never going to happen, or at least not going to happen with the limited funding we had. So we pivoted again, and then at that point,
how much money did you have at that time when you were decided to pivot?
We probably had like I would say a 3-month runway.
And then your investors, did you tell them like, hey, you gave us money for the original idea that now we're going to have to change?
Yeah. So luckily, a lot of my investors, I have my former boss, right? I have my, other angel investor, and we actually, a lot of us on the team put money in as well. So it was kind of, friendly. So we decided to pivot, and that pivot was actually what got us the Series A. And we got our term sheet. I remember, like right before Christmas, 2000, when nobody was raising money. And I'll tell you a little bit about the idea. Actually, the reason I got that visibility was I entered into an entrepreneur conference that was run by Guy Kawasaki. And he had this garage.com, or this garage concept where he probably only had one event in DC, and that was the event I was at. And at the event they had a elevator pitch competition. So I entered into this elevator pitch competition, and lo and behold, I won. And the prize was to meet with a group of venture capitalists in the area. And that directly led to the term sheet. So So one lesson to all your folks out there, don't turn down any opportunity to pitch your company or pitch your idea, because you never know what that can lead to. But the idea that ultimately worked was we would use the internet technology and effectively build a cloud service before the term cloud was ever used for the mobile operator. So back in the back when we started, this was 2000. There are, believe it or not, over 100 or actually several hundred mobile operators in the U.S. And AT&T Wireless was the largest mobile operator at the time, had less than 10% market share.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine back in the days, and because of all these mobile operators had selected different standards. Some of you might be old enough to hear the term TDMA or CDMA or GSM or IDAN or some others. But the problem was a lot of these mobile operators had selected a different standard, and they couldn't send SMS across networks. So if you're on AT&T and you want to send a text message to your friend on Verizon or T-Mobile, it didn't work. So my elevator pitch was very simple, which was, hey, text messaging works outside the U.S. really well. It had a very high usage in Asia, particularly markets like Philippines and China, and you work in Europe. But it wasn't working in the U.S. because, if you can imagine, if you have a Hotmail or Gmail email service provider and you had Yahoo and AOL, you couldn't send email to each other. You could only send email to your colleagues or friends that had the same internet service provider, and that wouldn't make any sense.
Terry, so this is a very interesting story what you just told us, right? I've heard your name as the father of texting, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I wouldn't say the father of texting, although I created the first interoperability platform for SMS, and before that, you couldn't send an SMS across networks. Right. So we created the service, really using internet-based technology to create a service, and this was actually important because we were actually the very first company that created a service for the mobile operators. Before we came, almost all vendors will create a box, and they want to sell that box to the mobile operator, and they would take 10 or 20% annual maintenance fee, but they want to sell that box. Right? We came along and we actually created kind of you can even call it a software as a service type model where we would charge a usage based on every message we deliver. Right. And we created a cloud service for it.
It's actually very like you guys created the first generation of utilizing internet protocol to connect the companies, and then now you see something like Twilio, who's kind of essentially doing the same thing. They're now a unicorn, and it's interesting how you're kind of taking the idea that you see somewhere else and you're kind of applying it into a market that's underserved or hasn't been realized yet. And so that's really important, I guess, a lesson to learn as entrepreneurs here, right?
Yeah. I would say the other lesson is, whatever insights you have, you don't necessarily have to listen to all these experts. Even after we got funded, and we did 4 rounds of venture funding, for a total of about $36 million. And I remember, at a board meeting, maybe back in 2003 or 2004. And, and our investors were telling us that SMS has run its course. We needed to move on to other things because, we couldn't be a quote unquote one-trick pony.
Right.
And lots of companies are one-trick ponies today, and they build unicorns, companies on top of that. Right. So I would say, a lot of things, so-called hear from these experts, they may or may not be as good as your own insights or your own beliefs. So whatever you got, and treasure that. And, you obviously there's a couple steps, right? You gotta be able to convince, you gotta make sure that you got the right idea in the right market. You can articulate it, and you can have your sustainable value propositions, or special sauce, if you would. And you got to know it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So there's going to be a lot of up and downs. You can't just give up the first time you hit a downturn.
Right.
And then once once you are able to convince a couple people to come work with you, and have that sort of the vision. People call it the vision, but some higher purpose. You want to. A lot of times, you feel like you want to change the world, or you want to change how the world operates, right? Mm-hmm. So once you got a group of people that believe in your higher purpose or your goal, you got to create that team, that high functioning team, to go after the opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. So those are all kind of steps you have to take to move from a concept or an idea to to a business plan, to a pitch deck, to convince your initial team and initial investors, and then take that into a business and create a revenue model, and then you got to make sure that it's going to be sustainable. So there's a series of steps that you have to take, that before you could feel like you're actually onto something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I'd like to move the timeline here with InfoMatch. When did Sybase start knocking on your door to be like, hey, how did they approach you? Was it like, hey, maybe we should partner, right? I mean, I was thinking like it's kind of like dating, right? It's like, somebody like knocks on the door or whatever, sends like, hey, how's it going? And then like, hey, do we want to partner? Let's do a small project together. Or was it like, bam, let's, we want to buy you out?
Yeah, so that came much later. In fact, let me kind of digress a little bit. So once we know we got something, we feel like we could see profitability in sight. Mm-hmm. I think when we got to about between $5 and $10 million annualized revenue, we felt like we could see the profitability in sight. And with success, you're gonna have people that's interested in the company. So I always joke, people ask me, what are the VCs good for? Mm-hmm. And I always joke that they're good for one thing, maybe one and a half things, but that one thing is they will stop you from selling out too early. So I remember like within maybe a year we had some interest. Companies wanted to buy us, and the price tag went from like 30 million, and then we got some interest at like around 75 million. Mm-hmm. And I always joked about like had it been up to me, I would have sold that company 5 times. But luckily the VCs are a lot greedier than me.
Right.
So one of and then another question that I get a lot is, how do you know it's the right time to sell? Mm-hmm. And I would say, as a founder, you probably have your own gut feeling, but the one objective way is and this is what the VCs tell me. And they say, look, if your company is growing faster than the market that you're addressing, you don't ever want to sell yet. Hmm. Because your company is going to be worth more tomorrow than today. But if you feel like your company has sort of run its competitive course, and it's growing no longer faster than what the industry is growing at, or at least you're lagging behind of other companies in the same space, then you got to think about exit. So that was a lesson that I've taken with me. And it actually took a lot of efforts to get the VCs to be interested to sell, because as a founder, particularly a first-time founder, you have a portfolio of one.
Right.
Right. So So if the if company didn't exit, you're not making any money at all. And the VCs have obviously a portfolio of X. So it took some work, took some convincing. But once the board, so one of the trick is if there's ever if any of you ever come across this situation when the share, when the board didn't want to sell, but you do. So what we did was we went out and actually got a company interested and put offer on the table, and that forced the board to hire the investment banker, which ran the process. So at that point, it was out of my hands or anybody's hands, and the process kind of ran its course. And the other thing I would tell you is the amount of that initial offer was actually less than half of what we ended up selling for. So a lot of times, if you just got that process started, if you are able to get a bidding war, or at least you get the buyer to think that they couldn't actually get it, if they offer enough, the price will escalate.
The other question too is like, is it important to strategize who you get money from? So what I mean by that, we always hear about the big startups who get some investment from SoftBank, and then everybody's like, oh yeah, like, because maybe they're notoriously known to like overinflate, and so the question would be like, do you have to strategize what type of VCs to go after?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Number one, yes, a reputable VC will help you with your future rounds. In fact, we got our Series A from Draper Atlantic, that's based in DC, and we had a lot of term sheets for our Series B, and we ended up selecting DFJ, which is of course one of the larger VCs in the Valley. So number one, yes, it does matter. Some people say smart money, but really it's you want people who believe in what you're doing, and people who believe the game plan you have laid out. The second thing is what I tell my fellow entrepreneurs is you're always trying to maximize the probability of success, never maximizing the valuation at any given point. Because any valuation at any given point doesn't really matter, because the only value that matters is at the end of your exit. So you don't want to trade off, because I've seen this a lot of times where entrepreneurs want, they want a certain valuation, and they end up choosing their investors or partners based on that valuation alone. What I would say is, in fact, I would say we even got lucky because, our valuation for Infomatch was never really high. So as the company went through, the recession, we never had a down round. We never had, because our value was so low that the expectation that we weren't able to achieve at least was high enough that we didn't have to have a down round, because anytime any entrepreneurs would know, the moment you have a down round, the founder gets washed out pretty much completely. Right. So you gotta be careful. You don't ever want a down round. Period.
Right. No, that's definitely a bad thing. A lot of these companies, when they go IPO, they actually end up doing a down round when they go IPO, right? Which tells you how overinflated it is. Now it's going to be a little different because we're now, quote unquote, in a recession. And so this is an interesting topic here, because I think what's important here, I mean, we have a room here full of entrepreneurs who's like thinking about starting a company, and some of the biggest companies now started in a recession, right? Just like how you guys did, right? In 2000. We're talking about Airbnb, Uber, Dropbox, Credit Karma, who just sold for $8 billion to Intuit, IBM, Disney, Microsoft, Apple, GM, HP, Facebook, right? So, my question would be like, is there a strategy of raising money now because you've already been through it, but it seems like it's probably one of the most difficult environment like in the history of entrepreneurism that we've seen.
Absolutely. So a couple points. One is when I started my first company, we actually started at the peak of the market. So that really helped in the sense that it helped first-time entrepreneurs like myself able to raise that money. The money was easier to raise. And I could say, of course, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, you want to raise that Series A in a recession, yeah, that's going to be really hard. And you just got to know that's going to be really hard. But at the end of the day, the value that you're going to create is going to attract that smart money, because there's always investors looking for good deals.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, let me kind of just run through it really quickly, right? Number one is you gotta have an addressable market that that has a lot of tailwind behind it. A lot of times, I joke about the definition of momentum. Some entrepreneurs will ask, hey, should I, what do I optimize for? How do I build momentum? Is the investor looking for revenue growth? Is it looking for usage growth? Is it, what is it looking for? And I would just say, momentum in general is, in physics, the definition of momentum is mass times velocity. So the mass is, how big is that market? You got to look for a big enough market that's going to move the needle for these investors. A lot of times people will say, hey, any market that's less than, $1 billion, it's going to be hard for VCs to invest in. Mm-hmm. So the addressable market has to be large enough, and you have to be able to define it and articulate it.
Yeah.
And that could be based on, revenue or usage or whatever the case might be, right? You got to find, the first guy that had the definition of, to value internet companies, I thought was a genius, right? Because nobody knew how to value internet companies at that point. And I think this was like 95, 96. Somebody on Wall Street came up with the definition of eyeballs, right? It's like, oh, you can attract how many eyeballs, and that becomes a metric. So it doesn't matter. Come up with some metric that you invent. It doesn't matter, right? The momentum is some metric that you come up with.
Okay.
That's right. Large enough. And then the velocity is you actually guys show you're doing, there's actually some evidence. There's actually some objective data that says, yes, you're actually executing, right? Whether that's, again, usage or, number of accounts or, if you're in gaming, it might be DAUs and MAUs. You could come up with whatever that makes sense for you. But you got to be able to show the addressable market large enough, and you're actually growing, at a speed that's gonna be better than other deals that these investors are looking at.
Okay, so Terry, we're kind of getting short on time here because I want to open this up for Q&A. But there's a few more questions I'd like to ask. Obviously Series A, pre-seed, seed, Series A, and then finally mezzanine funding, and then IPO, right? So Can you kind of tell us like that experience, because there's going to be very few people that'll actually go through that experience. I mean, even some of these big ones that I've mentioned here, Dropbox, I don't think they have gone IPO yet, right?
Karma, Dropbox is public.
Oh, they did? Okay, so with Credit Karma, they won M&A.
Yeah. Dropbox, although Dropbox, I'll digress a little bit. Dropbox is one of the company that's raised the most amount of money that they haven't actually created enough value to match the money that they have raised.
Right. And so kind of step us through that, like, getting there. Did you think, first of all, how was the experience? And then after you've taken the company public, retrospect, do you feel that, hey, maybe we should have just stayed private, or no, this was the best thing to do is to go public?
Yeah, again, what I want to say is every deal is different. So every situation, every founder, every company is different. So do the ways that make sense for you at this time. What I would say though is, when you're early, you gotta sell that, pipe dream. You gotta sell that vision, because nothing is there yet. So when you're early, you talk about vision, you talk about how the world should be or how you're going to change the world, and then gradually it becomes more of a numbers game. If you're going to raise Series B, Series C, you'll be like, well, the next milestone generally is taking it from, say, a $10 million revenue run rate to 100 million, something like that. It's all about scaling, right? And then when you take it to public market, and I joke with my friends, when you take it to the public market, it's almost like you're selling vegetables at a night market. At that point, it's all about numbers. It's all about, because somebody comes through the door, they're looking for something. They're looking to cook a meal tonight. Right? So at that point, the investor comes in, they're looking to cook a meal tonight. So you gotta find out, like, hey, are they cooking a fancy dinner? Are they cooking for themselves? And then you talk to the right set of investors based on whatever you're selling. If you're selling, tomatoes, you gotta know that you're buyers.
Right.
And then if they don't like your tomatoes, you'll be like, okay, how about I reduce the price, or how about I'll give you some scallions, right? And at that point, I was never in any of those pitches to the public side of investors. Never once somebody says, oh, what's the vision of the company? What's the company going to be like 5 years from now? Like, nobody's ever asked that question. So your time horizon have really shrunk to a very short, like some people say, well, like this in the next, standard, like next 3 to 5 years. But even that, it's like, you got to run it quarter by quarter, because nobody likes surprises. They want to know almost exactly to the dot what your revenue and what your margin is going to be next quarter. You got to be able to answer that question. So it's
almost like
from early stage to later stage, it's very different dynamics.
So it's almost like a sprint. Always have to like be executing, like you mentioned, the mass velocity, big ass market, badass. What was it? No.
Jeff, no, I know what you're talking about.
Right,
Jeff.
Market, badass team.
Yeah,
kick-ass product, right? So
that's right. Kick-ass product, big-ass market.
Smart-ass team. That's what it is. Smart-ass team. That's
Smart-ass team. That's right.
Right. So
three asses.
Yeah, the 3 asses rule, right?
Yeah.
And so before I open up for questions here, wanted to ask, like, you do a lot of angel investing. So what kind of things do you look for? Well, actually, before I ask that, what are some of the areas that interest you and why? Right? Because I mean, obviously, you're looking at it and you think that's going to be a very big market, and obviously, and that's what angels like to do. They like to invest in things that hasn't been invested before. So kind of give us, your thoughts.
Yeah. So again, the market, the what I call the sustainable value proposition, or the special sauce, if you would, taking it from a cook perspective. But very importantly, let me kind of just let me answer your question a different way. So, so everybody have whatever their investment thesis, right? The markets they like, the type of business they like, the verticals they like. But the common layer is the founder team, right? Or the founder. So let me talk a little bit about what I would look for in a founder. I think there's 3 basic skill sets that, or characteristics that I want to see. Number 1 is that founder is, it demonstrates an ability, a very strong ability to learn, or, and a very high intensity to be coached. Somebody that you could really see they understand what you're communicating with them about, and making sort of making assessments and adjustments. So the ability to learn, ability to be coached. The second thing is they show a deep curiosity about the field or about their product or about their customers. And you could tell that even if they don't make any money, they would be happily doing that for free if they have to. Or, it doesn't matter if they raise money, they're still going to be doing it. That's the type of the characteristic that we'll be looking for, is somebody that just got that deep, I'll say the overused word is passion, but I would call it a deep curiosity about, their product, their customers, or, or some insights that they have. Think about, Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs is just deep, curious, and passionate about the user experience and the product. He could care less about the customers, right? So one of those things. And the last thing is demonstrated empathy. So when I say empathy, it's not just like, hey, I feel how you feel, or I think the most basic is, I can put myself in the shoes of my customers and see the perspective that they see. I can put myself in the shoes of my supplier. I can put myself in the shoes of my competitors and see what they see. That's really the most basic. But I really want to see is the ability to be able to see the entire ecosystem and be able to analyze and articulate the value chain and the incentive structure of that ecosystem. If you come up with an idea or a product, why would these people want to kill it? Or why would these people want to adopt it? Or what are these people going to say to mess your thing up?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? So you got to be able to not just think in somebody else's shoes, be able to look at the ecosystem and the value chain holistically, and be able to understand the incentive structure, and be able to come up with the least frictionless way for your product and services to be adopted. And that's what you're looking for.
Got it. Okay, so 3 things: demonstrate the ability to learn, coachability, passion and deep curiosity, and 3, demonstrate empathy, because you want to know how your competitors, how do you see it from the perspective of competitors that can mess this thing up. So
right.
The thing is, do you have any just like, if you had a crystal ball,
yes.
what are the tech that because there's going to be people who are working on certain things here, and whether it's VR, AR, blockchain.
No, that's cool. So I've some of the people I've talked to, probably heard it before, but I simplify it to what I call A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Obviously, AI, machine learning, is hot. Blockchain is hot. C, I would say cloud in general. D is for digital transformation. Every business is going to be a hybrid of online and offline. So it has a huge opportunity to reinvent the user experience and come up with the tools to help the enterprises to meet the next generation of digital experience. E for energy, whether it's the transmission or storage of energy. And then I kind of say, F and G is 5G. So anything relates to the sort of the new way of ultra bandwidth, low latency, edge computing, autonomous driving. 5G is going to change a lot of how our world operates. I would call it the Internet Plus.
Got it. Not H, healthcare.
I mean, you can go on and on, but yeah, that's all I can remember.
Okay, cool. So what I'll do here is, if you guys can turn on, so I guess maybe if you could, what's the best way to do this? I guess, right?
I think you want people to raise your hand, right?
Yeah, raise your hand. Yeah. So if you can turn on, and then we'll unmute you.
Yeah.
Actually, Terry's co-host,
So
so he's actually controlling this.
Oh, I'm not. I'm not gonna worry about that.
Got it. All right.
No,
So,
but anybody who's on, I'd love to see you. You can turn on your camera, so I can see
actually,
some
so
of you
here's a
now.
question I see here. Okay. So. Okay, so the one question here we have, before you spoke about listening to your intuition rather than investor VC systematically, but also they do look for, okay, there's a question there. Okay, do look for coachability. I'm very open and always listening. However, I consider an expert in my field. There are occasions when I push back because the suggestions don't make sense. I find sometimes the coach, investor, advisors show visible annoyance despite me being very polite and respectful. How do you handle these situations? This was from Christina.
Yeah, so Christina, I don't know if I can see you anywhere, but let me kind of at least take a stab at it. Yes. So number one is, you want to be polite, but investors don't mind, right? Number one is the investors are all curious, or they should be curious people. They want to learn something. So if you think they're wrong, educate them. I never mind to be educated, right? The second thing is investors are generally very shallow, because we see a lot of deals, and we're not going to be able to know as much about your thing as you do. So you got to simplify that for us. This is kind of stupid, but it's like, find something that you can explain your business with. Whether it's Uber for weeds, or Uber for dog walking, or whatever the stupid cases might be. You got and the investors. I also find that they generally apply their own personal experience, even though they may be in their 50s and they don't know anything about the teenager experience, which the smart investors will go back and ask their kids. In fact, a couple of businesses got funded this way, right? I remember Snapchat and some others. It's because the VCs don't understand anything about it, but they go back to their kids, and the kid would be like, oh yeah, this came out 3 weeks ago, and now half of my friends are on it. Mm-hmm. Right? So the investors don't mind you educating them about what's going on or about the insights you have. Obviously, do it politely, and you got to simplify it for them. They're not going to know a whole lot. Certainly not as much as you should. Otherwise, you should be funding them to do something, right? So they're looking for someone who can articulate it, who sees a clear path to execution, and then once they get past that, they just gotta say, okay, do I pick you, or do I believe in you? That you want it to get to a point where that's their only question mark. Then you're almost there.
So we're trying this a little differently, because if you have a question, I actually want Terry to see you, because we're going to be inviting him back to a summer party. So I try to make some value here, right? So then remember. So Justin actually had a question. So Christina, thank you for that question.
Oh yes, I can see Justin.
Thank you
Justin.
very much. Sorry, I'm juggling different things, so I couldn't see on video for a second.
No problem. I can see you now.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. But thank you.
I'm going to unmute Justin. You can ask your question directly.
No, thank you very much. So I'm building a social impact tech company, and we have an MVP that we've just launched. And my question is, how do we attract early stage impact investors, given that we are still pre-revenue, provided that we demonstrate both mass and velocity?
Great question, Justin. So number one, a lot of investors nowadays would advertise that they like social impact. So first of all, obviously go find those investors that have a tendency to invest in that type of tech companies.
Are you one of those?
It's funny, right? What I would say is, I don't ever really understand the difference, because you could say every business has some social impact, and every tech company that you're building, if it works for social impact, it works for everybody. So I don't ever really have an opinion about something that has social impact or not, because I don't think it matters. Although you could also say that yes, if your business makes a lot of money, but it's going to kill or it's going to make our next generation dumber or lazy, is that something I want to invest in? I think it's all case by case basis. So I guess it's a long way of answering your question, but I think number one, I would say I run into more and more today, much more higher percentage today than even just a couple of years ago, that people say, hey, I invest in social impact technology companies, or I invest in early stage ecosystem with social impact. You hear that a lot. So if they, if they already say that, go make sure that they're not lying about it, right? And if they like social impact, they should be interested in your technology and your company. And if nothing else, they'll be able to give you good feedback. So start with those that already outspoken about their intentions.
Okay, well, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So if anybody want to send a question onto the chat, or any of you guys who are on video, you can raise your hand if you have a question. If not, I can ask okay, there we go,
Michael, yeah.
Let's unmute Michael. Hold on. Well, hold on. There you go.
All right, you got it.
I'm on the telephone. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So, yeah, I started a company years ago where I sent alphanumeric pagers, real-time stock quotes, and I'm listening to. I probably used your backbone or something. Didn't even know it, But I used some kind of aspect scripting language, and I don't even know if in a Procom software. It was years ago. And so I started a paging company. I grew it to about 1,000 people, and I sold it. And then I got into headhunting. So I started to recruit for Big 5 consulting firms. And now I'm in a position where I'm looking to start something new or get involved with a group of people that are a small team of developers. But I don't want to take somebody's money. I'd rather, I don't mind taking venture capital, but I wouldn't want to take it unless I knew clearly what the requirements are, for returning that money to the investors, and believed in it strongly enough in some of my ideas. But I do have some ideas for 5G with development. I have a background developing in code myself with web development with Microsoft, and can develop databases in Azure. So I'm looking for other people but I'm 50 years old. I'm not the best coder in the world, right? There are people that are so much quicker than me. So I can relate to you, Terry. And so I'm looking for people like that have a common interest to do something with 5G. And I'm thinking about, there's needs, to share for those 5G signals. You got T-Mobile, they can go 800 yards. Then you got Verizon, they're going to be more shorter distances. So you're going to have different applications for different latencies. And there's so many opportunities, and there's so many needs.
So Michael, do you have a question though? Is there a question that he can answer?
I'm looking for people. Can you help me put these people together if I wanted to do something like that?
I
maybe with these.
Yeah, I think you're in the right place, right? You're in the right forum. So
yeah.
Everybody on this session potentially could help you. So
Sure,
I'll leave it at that. So maybe you want to get to the last question, Brian?
Yeah. So my last question. So I think we're good on the Q&A.
Okay.
So we always end our fireside chat.
I remember.
With 2 questions.
Okay.
So number 1 is, if you could go back 20 years, not 30, 20 years, what would be the single best piece of advice you would have given yourself, and why?
I would say, even though I felt like I had it back then, I think my advice to myself would have been, whatever you believe in, just go right ahead. You know, until you get on the journey, it doesn't mean anything, right? So my point is, just, I don't know how many of you you know, have any selling experience. When you set the sailboat out off the dock, there's really only one direction that is completely wrong, right? Only the dead wind is when you cannot sail. Every other direction can get you going. So once you get going, you collect data, you know where the wind is going. You don't need to plot out your entire course before you get off the dock. And you just got to get going, collect the data, make adjustments, and eventually you get to where you want to get to. So don't let everything else to stop you and tell you that you can't do it. And keep control of your company as long as possible. Because the moment you pass that baton to somebody else, you're not driving the bus anymore. The moment you give somebody else the steering wheel, that's it. You become a screw. You become a part that you're not driving it anymore. So that's really important. And then the other thing I would say is, and this is probably people, it's hard for a lot of people, right? So I would say is, pick your team carefully. Don't, like a lot of us have the tendency to go to our friends first. I would say, don't have the preconceived notion of who could be on your team and who couldn't. And really go find the best people that you can find, and spend twice as much time with them before you fully engage with them. But the moment you feel like you need to be separated, you gotta move fast, because otherwise it just drags on forever. So those are probably some of the lessons I would say to myself.
Okay, and then one last question, and we always ask this last question to all of our speakers.
You warned me.
100 times, and they all answered it. So, ready?
Yes, superhero question. Yeah.
Or
so just so everybody else knows, Brian warned me about this question yesterday, or was it earlier today? And I thought about it, and my answer is Michael Jordan. So I don't know, some of you, not all of you grew up when I did. I know Michael did. So Michael and I probably watched the same Michael Jordan that some of you missed. But not for his playing, right? He was very famous for saying the following: I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. He felt like he lost more than 300 games. And I think he said it was 26 times somebody entrusted him to take the last shot and he missed and lost the game. He said, look, I'm not even making half my shots. And because he fails, and he fails over and over and over again, that is why he succeeds. I think there is a lesson there for all of us entrepreneurs. Do not be afraid to fail. In fact, the trick is to fail a lot, is to make lots of mistakes on the things that you could easily correct, on the things that don't kill you. But you gotta be right on those few times. You need to be right. And that's how you become successful. You gotta be right on the big things, on the right things. So with that, I hope that answers your question and wraps up the session tonight. And I want to thank everybody to spend your hour with us of this difficult time.
So Terry, thank you for getting on here. And actually, I wanted to just remind everybody, in our regular meet, we would actually be doing this thing called shout outs, where, Michael, that's where you could be like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to help me and things like that. So I wanted to kind of mention that, but I don't think we'll have time today to do these breakouts. I think it was a little bit too long. The next one we'll do a breakout. We'll try to make the interview a little bit shorter. But Terry, thank you so much for being our guest. And Terry, you're just, you're actually one of the staple DC super angels, rockstar entrepreneurs here in the DC tech area. And we're just so honored to have you be here and grace us with your presence. So if there are any ways that people can get a hold of you, is it like through Twitter?
Yeah, very good. So every one of you, feel free to send me a LinkedIn request. You should be able to see my name on my screen, or if you're here tonight, you probably know who I am by now. So yeah, just send me a LinkedIn request and said, hey, if you have any questions, feel free to ask that right there. And just mention that you met me through this event. So
and then also if any of you like golfing, Terry is a big golfer. So
Brian and I also play basketball. So
basketball too, right? Basketball too. So well, thank you very much, everyone, for showing up. Terry, thank you again, and we will make an announcement of our next speaker. We're kind of trying to get some last scheduling, and it's a pretty big. Hopefully, we can get them, and it's from Amazon actually, so it's pretty high up executive there. So, but stay tuned, and everyone, thank you for coming out, and please stay safe. Remember, make friends, not contacts. Give before you take. Help others before helping yourself. So thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next.
All right, awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Take care, everyone.